2 years after my family destroyed my life over a lie, my phone rang at 3 in the morning. My father's voice cracked through the speaker, barely recognizable through his sobs. Mom, he said, had found something during their kitchen renovation. Something that proved I'd been telling the truth all along. Madison's engagement ring, the one that cost me everything I held dear, sat mangled and twisted in their garbage disposal, crushed beyond repair, but still identifiable by its distinctive setting. The same ring my sister swore I had stolen the accusation that turned my own blood against me and left me homeless, jobless, and completely alone. As Dad begged for forgiveness through his tears, I realized this discovery would unravel more than just their kitchen pipes. Before that nightmare began, I was Elton Mitchell, 28 years old, living what most people would call a pretty decent life in suburban Columbus, Ohio. My days started at 7 sharp in my converted garage apartment behind my parents' house on Maple Street, a cozy setup that gave me independence while keeping me close to family. The morning routine never varied coffee from the ancient percolator Mom had passed down, then off to work at Uncle Steve's architecture firm downtown, where I spent my days drafting blueprints for strip malls and residential developments. Our family operated like a well-oiled machine back then. Dad worked as an electrician for the city, his hands permanently stained with wire grease, but his paycheck steady enough to keep us comfortable. Mom served as secretary at Roosevelt Elementary, beloved by every kid who passed through those doors with scraped knees or forgotten lunch money. Every Sunday we gathered around their dining room table for pot roast and mashed potatoes, sharing stories from our week, while Grandpa Frank held court from his recliner nearby. Grandpa had moved in with us after Grandma Helen passed 3 years earlier, his 74-year-old frame still sturdy, but his spirit broken by loneliness. I helped him with his medications and drove him to doctor appointments, while he regaled me with stories from his postal route days and taught me poker tricks that would have scandalized Mom if she knew about our Friday night games. Then there was Madison, my sister, 3 years younger, and the undisputed star of our family constellation. Everything about her sparkled her perfect teeth from years of dental hygienist training. Her infectious laugh that could brighten any room, her ability to make everyone feel special when her attention landed on them. Mom and Dad doted on her every achievement, from her promotion at the dental practice to her volunteer work at the animal shelter, their pride radiating whenever her name came up in conversation. But I knew Madison better than anyone else, having grown up sharing a bathroom wall and countless family vacations crammed into our old minivan. Behind the dazzling smile lay a calculated mind that had learned early how to position herself as the victim whenever trouble arose. In high school, she had convinced our parents that her failing grades resulted from my loud music disrupting her study time, never mentioning her habit of sneaking out to parties every weekend. When she crashed Dad's truck into a mailbox during her senior year, she managed to blame it on faulty brakes rather than the beer on her breath. Still, I loved her fiercely and attributed her manipulative streaks to immaturity that would fade with age. Family loyalty ran deep in our household, and we protected each other against outside threats even when we fought internally. That Sunday in late April, Madison arrived at dinner practically vibrating with excitement, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright with secrets. She waited until we had finished Mom's famous banana cream pie before making her announcement, standing up from her chair like she was accepting an award. Derek Hamilton had proposed to her the night before at Sunset Ridge, the fancy restaurant overlooking the Scioto River that charged $30 for a steak. She displayed her engagement ring with theatrical flair, a 3-carat diamond, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light from Mom's chandelier and threw rainbows across the wallpaper. The ring was gorgeous, absolutely stunning, but something about it made my architect brain start calculating numbers that did not add up. Derek worked in pharmaceutical sales, or so he claimed, driving a territory that covered central Ohio and parts of Kentucky. His business cards listed him as a regional representative, but his lifestyle suggested income levels far beyond what most sales reps earned. The Rolex on his wrist cost more than Dad made in 6 months, and his BMW sat in our driveway like a gleaming accusation against the rest of our modest vehicles. While my parents peppered Madison with questions about wedding plans, and Derek basked in their approval, I found myself studying his face more carefully. His smile never quite reached his eyes, and he had a habit of deflecting personal questions by redirecting conversations toward Madison's accomplishments or our family's generosity in welcoming him. After dinner, while Mom and Madison pored over bridal magazines in the living room and Derek charmed Dad with stories about his golf game, I pulled my sister aside in the kitchen under the pretense of helping with dishes. "Madison," I said quietly while scraping plates, "something feels off about Derek's financial situation. His car that watched the ring he bought you, none of it matches up with what pharmaceutical reps typically earn." Her expression shifted from dreamy contentment to cold anger faster than I had ever seen. The plate in her hands trembled slightly as she set it down with deliberate control. "You cannot stand seeing me happy, can you, Elton?" She whispered, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Finally, someone treats me like I deserve, and you have to find problems with him." "I am just looking out for you," I protested. "Something does not add up, and I would rather ask awkward questions now than watch you get hurt later." Madison stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss that would not carry to the next room. "Derek makes good money because he works harder than anyone I know. Unlike some people who live in their parents' garage and draft blueprints for gas stations, he has ambition and success." The words stung because they carried enough truth to hurt. My architecture career had stalled in the mundane projects Uncle Steve's small firm could attract, and living behind my parents' house at 28 was not exactly the American dream in action. Before I could respond, Derek appeared in the doorway with that practiced smile, sliding his arm around Madison's waist with territorial precision. "Everything okay in here?" He asked, his tone light, but his eyes assessing the tension between us. "Just discussing wedding details," Madison replied smoothly, leaning into his embrace while her gaze stayed locked on mine. "Elton was just leaving to get some fresh air." The dismissal was clear, and I retreated to my apartment, feeling uneasy about the whole interaction. Looking back now, I realized that moment planted the seed of resentment that would eventually grow into my destruction. Madison had always been competitive with me, but Derek's presence seemed to amplify that rivalry into something darker and more dangerous. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the sounds of celebration continuing in the main house, I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe Derek had family money, or maybe pharmaceutical sales paid better than I thought. Madison deserved happiness, and if I was wrong about him, my suspicions would only damage our relationship. But the numbers still would not balance in my head, and something about Derek's two perfect answers set off alarm bells I could not ignore. Within 3 weeks, those instincts would prove devastatingly accurate, though not in any way I could have predicted. 3 weeks later, on the first Saturday of May, our family gathered to celebrate Grandpa Frank's 75th birthday with a backyard barbecue that had become our traditional way of marking important occasions. Mom had spent the morning preparing his favorite German potato salad while Dad fired up the ancient charcoal grill that had survived more family gatherings than anyone could count. The weather cooperated perfectly, offering the kind of mild spring afternoon that made Columbus feel like paradise, instead of the industrial city it actually was. Madison arrived with Derek carrying a professionally wrapped gift and wearing a sundress that showed off her engagement ring to maximum effect. She had been different since the engagement, more confident and theatrical, as if Derek's proposal had confirmed something important about her worth in the world. Every conversation somehow circled back to wedding planning, from the venue they had booked at Brookside Country Club to the destination honeymoon in Aruba that Derek insisted on funding entirely himself. Our extended family filled the backyard, Uncle Steve and Aunt Carol with their twin boys, Mom's sister Linda with her husband and teenage daughter, plus a handful of neighbors who had watched Grandpa Frank tend his garden for decades. The atmosphere buzzed with the easy warmth of people who had shared countless meals and celebrations together, everyone relaxed and happy in the golden afternoon light. Around 4 o'clock, Madison excused herself to use the bathroom, and I noticed her tugging at her engagement ring as she walked toward the house. The ring had been bothering her lately, she had mentioned to Mom earlier, because the sizing was slightly off and it kept sliding around her finger. The jeweler had promised to resize it after the wedding, but until then she had to be careful not to lose it during hand washing or cleaning. 20 minutes passed before Madison's scream shattered the peaceful afternoon, a sound of pure panic that sent everyone running toward the house. We found her standing in the hallway bathroom sobbing hysterically, while Derek tried to calm her down with an arm around her shaking shoulders. "It is gone," she gasped between tears, holding up her bare left hand, like evidence of a crime. "My engagement ring, I took it off to wash my hands and now it is gone." The bathroom was tiny, barely 6 feet square with nowhere for a ring to hide. We searched frantically anyway behind the toilet, under the sink, in the wastebasket, even pulling up the bath mat to check beneath. Mom checked the sink drain while Dad examined the windowsill and medicine cabinet. Nothing. Derek suggested we search everyone's pockets and belongings, his voice calm and reasonable despite his fiance's hysteria. Just to eliminate all possibilities, he explained, before we call the police and file an insurance claim. The suggestion hit the room like a physical blow, transforming a family emergency into something uglier and more suspicious. Mom looked stricken at the implication that one of our guests might be a thief, while Dad's expression darkened with offended dignity. But before anyone could protest Derek's proposal, Madison pointed directly at me with a trembling finger. "I saw Elton coming out of the bathroom about 10 minutes before I went in," she declared, her voice gaining strength through accusation. "He was walking toward the kitchen, but he could have taken it then." The words landed in my chest like a physical punch, driving the air from my lungs and leaving me speechless with shock. Every face in the hallway turned toward me, and I watched as doubt crept into expressions that had shown only love and trust moments before. "Madison, that is insane." I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse with disbelief. "Why would I steal your ring? What would I even do with it? You have always been jealous of my success." She shot back, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her voice gaining conviction. "You questioned Derek's finances from day one, trying to poison everyone against him because you cannot stand seeing me happy." Derek produced a small notebook from his jacket pocket and suggested we write down everyone's movements for the past hour, treating our family barbecue like a crime scene investigation. His demeanor remained professionally sympathetic, but I caught a flash of something calculating in his eyes when he looked at me. The search of personal belongings revealed nothing, which only seemed to confirm Madison's suspicions in her mind. If the ring was not in the bathroom and not on any of our guests, then whoever took it must have already hidden it somewhere else. Derek helpfully suggested checking my apartment, since I had access to private space where evidence could be concealed. Walking through my own living space while family members rifled through my belongings felt like a nightmare that could not possibly be real. Derek made a show of examining my architecture portfolio, suggesting the ring could be slipped between the large sheets of drafting paper. When that search proved fruitless, he moved on to my dresser drawers and closet, maintaining his helpful demeanor while systematically violating my privacy. Madison watched from my doorway, no longer crying, but wearing an expression of grim vindication that chilled me more than her initial hysteria had. This was not the face of someone hoping to find her lost jewelry. This was someone confirming a suspicion she had already decided was fact. Mom tried to mediate, suggesting the ring might have fallen behind the bathroom radiator or rolled under the door into the hallway, but Derek gently discouraged those theories by pointing out how thoroughly we had already searched those areas. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being believed, and I watched my parents begin to defer to his judgment despite knowing me for 28 years. The afternoon dissolved into uncomfortable conversations in small groups, with family members casting uncertain glances in my direction, while Derek comforted Madison on the porch swing. Uncle Steve pulled me aside to suggest I think carefully about whether I might have moved the ring accidentally, perhaps while cleaning or organizing something, his tone carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying to avoid taking sides in a family dispute. But there were no sides to take, I wanted to scream. I had not touched Madison's ring, had not even seen it in the bathroom, had no reason to want it, and no idea what Derek hoped to accomplish by encouraging suspicion against me. Yet the doubt had been planted, and I could see it taking root in the soil of old resentments and unexamined assumptions about my character. As evening approached and guests began making excuses to leave early, Derek announced his intention to contact his insurance company and possibly file a police report. The ring was worth over $10,000, he explained to my parents, and theft was a serious criminal matter that could not be swept under the rug for the sake of family harmony. The threat hung in the air like smoke from Dad's neglected grill, acrid and stifling. Madison nodded along with Derek's pronouncements, occasionally adding details about how much the ring meant to her and how violated she felt by its disappearance. Every word she spoke seemed carefully chosen to deepen the impression that I was the obvious suspect, the family member with motive, means, and opportunity. That night, after everyone had gone home, and the backyard lay littered with paper plates and abandoned lawn chairs, I sat in my apartment trying to process what had happened. In the space of 4 hours, I had gone from beloved son and brother to suspected thief, and the transformation felt so sudden and complete that I wondered if I was losing my mind. The worst part was not the accusation itself, but the speed with which doubt had infected people who claimed to love me unconditionally. If my own family could believe I was capable of stealing from Madison, then perhaps I did not know them as well as I thought. Or perhaps they had never known me at all. The week following Grandpa Frank's ruined birthday party stretched like a slow-motion catastrophe, each day bringing fresh evidence that my family's faith in me was crumbling beyond repair. Madison had returned to work at the dental practice, but her story of the stolen ring spread through their office and into the wider community with the efficiency of small-town gossip. Patients expressed sympathy, co-workers offered support, and everyone who heard the tale seemed to agree that family theft represented the worst kind of betrayal imaginable. Derek, meanwhile, had hired a private investigator named Russell Clark, a former Columbus police detective who specialized in insurance fraud and domestic theft cases. Clark arrived at our house on Tuesday morning wearing a cheap suit and carrying a briefcase full of forms, his presence transforming our living room into an interrogation chamber that made everyone uncomfortable except Derek himself. Clark interviewed each family member separately, taking detailed notes about the timeline of Saturday's events and everyone's observations about my behavior. His questions grew increasingly pointed when my turn came, focusing on my financial situation and whether I had any outstanding debts or gambling problems that might motivate theft. The suggestion was absurd, but Clark presented it with the clinical detachment of someone who had seen every possible variation of human weakness. He noted my modest income from Uncle Steve's architecture firm, my lack of significant savings, and my continued residence in my parents' garage apartment as potential indicators of financial desperation. When I protested that I had no debts beyond my car payment and lived simply by choice rather than necessity, Clark nodded with professional skepticism and made additional notes in his leather portfolio. His final question caught me completely off guard. Would I be willing to submit to a polygraph examination to clear my name definitively? The request hit me like a slap across the face, not because I feared the test itself, but because it confirmed how far my family's trust had deteriorated. They were seriously considering the possibility that I had committed a felony against my own sister, and they wanted scientific proof of my innocence rather than accepting my word as someone they had known and loved for nearly 3 decades. Derek supported Clark's suggestion enthusiastically, offering to pay for the polygraph and suggesting we schedule it as soon as possible to resolve the uncertainty that was tearing our family apart. His concern for family harmony sounded genuine, but I noticed how his eyes brightened at the prospect of subjecting me to further humiliation. Madison sat beside Derek during this conversation, her hand resting on his knee, in a gesture of unified support that excluded everyone else in the room. She had stopped making direct eye contact with me since Saturday, addressing her comments to our parents, as if I had become invisible or unworthy of acknowledgement. When I refused to take the polygraph test, explaining that innocent people should not have to prove their innocence with machines, the room's atmosphere shifted towards something colder and more accusatory. Mom looked disappointed while Dad's expression hardened with what I recognized as the stubborn anger that surfaced whenever he felt disrespected or challenged. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," son Dad said, his voice carrying the tone he had used when I was 12 and had broken the neighbor's window with a baseball. "Just take the test and put this whole mess behind us." But it was not that simple, and I could not make them understand why their request felt like a betrayal worse than any theft. By asking me to prove my innocence, they were admitting they believed I might be guilty. That doubt, once acknowledged, would never completely disappear regardless of what any test revealed. Derek filled the uncomfortable silence by sharing new information Clark had uncovered during his investigation. Apparently, I had a savings account containing $847, which Derek characterized as surprisingly small for someone my age with steady employment. More damning, Clark had discovered I occasionally played poker with Grandpa Frank and some of his friends from the senior center games that involved small stakes, but still constituted gambling according to Ohio state law. The poker revelation particularly upset Mom, who had always associated gambling with moral weakness and family destruction. The fact that I had hidden these games from her, even though they involved nothing more than $5 buy-ins and penny ante betting, seemed to confirm suspicions about my general trustworthiness. Clark's investigation had also revealed that I had researched Derek's background online after Madison's engagement announcement, searching for information about his previous employment and educational history. This digital detective work, which I had undertaken out of protective concern for my sister, was now presented as evidence of jealousy and resentment that could have motivated theft. Every piece of information felt twisted and weaponized, transformed from innocent details of my life into building blocks of a criminal profile that painted me as desperate, deceptive, and dangerous. The methodical destruction of my character was masterful in its thoroughness, and I began to suspect that Derek had orchestrated this entire scenario for reasons I could not yet understand. The breaking point came on Thursday evening when Dad handed me an official-looking document that Clark had prepared, a sworn statement acknowledging my refusal to submit to polygraph testing and accepting responsibility for any consequences that might result from continued investigation. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the message was clear: cooperate with Derek's demands or face potential criminal prosecution. Uncle Steve had already called to inform me that my presence at the architecture firm was creating uncomfortable situations with clients who had heard about the theft allegations. While he stopped short of firing me outright, he suggested I take unpaid leave until the situation resolved itself, a suggestion that felt more like a command given our family's interconnected financial relationships. Grandpa Frank remained my only defender, but his support came at a terrible cost. The stress of watching his family disintegrate over accusations he knew were false triggered chest pains that landed him in the emergency room Wednesday night. The doctor said his heart was fine, but the episode served as a stark reminder of his age and fragility, adding another layer of guilt to my already overwhelming burden. Friday morning brought the final ultimatum delivered by Dad, with the grim formality of a judge pronouncing sentence. Either I would submit to the polygraph test within 48 hours, or they would file a police report and let the authorities handle the investigation through official channels. The choice was no choice at all, designed to force my compliance through fear of worse consequences. But something inside me rebelled against the fundamental unfairness of the situation, the assumption that family loyalty could be measured by submission to humiliation, and that love required proof rather than trust. I looked at my father's face, searching for any trace of the man who had taught me to ride a bicycle and helped with homework and attended every school play where I had forgotten my lines. But that man seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who saw me as a problem to be solved rather than a son to be protected. No, I said quietly, the word falling into the silence like a stone into still water. I will not take your test, and I will not apologize for things I did not do. If you choose to believe I am a thief based on Derek's investigation and Madison's accusations, then you never knew me at all. The disappointment in Mom's eyes cut deeper than any anger could have, but I knew that capitulating to their demands would only delay the inevitable. Derek would never be satisfied with my innocence, and Madison would never forgive me for questioning her judgment. Better to face their rejection honestly than to earn temporary reprieve through false confession. That night, as I packed my most essential belongings into 2 suitcases and a duffel bag, I heard the sound of locks being changed on the main house. Dad was taking no chances with someone he now considered a potential burglar, protecting his family's security against the son he had raised to value honesty above all other virtues. The irony was not lost on me, but it hurt too much to find any humor in the situation. By morning, I would be homeless and unemployed, cast out from the only life I'd ever known, because I refused to confess to crimes I had not committed. The eviction notice was typed on official letterhead that Dad must have gotten from his union office, complete with legal terminology about breach of lease agreements and tenant violations that would have been laughable if they were not destroying my life. 24 hours to vacate the premises, it stated, due to theft of personal property and refusal to cooperate with ongoing investigation. Mom stood in the driveway, clutching her bathrobe closed against the morning chill, tears streaming down her face as she watched me load my belongings into my 10-year-old Honda Civic. Her pain looked genuine, but she made no move to intervene or protest Dad's decision, her loyalty to Madison and Derek apparently outweighing whatever love she still felt for me. "You can come back when you are ready to tell the truth," she said through her tears, the words carrying a finality that made my chest ache. "We will always love you, Elton. But we cannot have someone in our home who steals from family." The accusation still felt surreal, like being blamed for a crime that had only happened in someone else's nightmare. But the evidence of their belief surrounded me: locks, changed belongings, packed family members avoiding eye contact as I carried my life out to the curb in garbage bags and cardboard boxes. Derek emerged from the house wearing his bathrobe and slippers, apparently comfortable enough in my parents' home to treat it as his own domain. His expression mixed sympathy with satisfaction as he approached my car, and I realized he was savoring this moment of complete victory over the brother who had dared question his motives. "I hope you find what you are looking for, Elton," he said with false sincerity, extending his hand as if we were concluding a business transaction. "Madison and I want nothing but the best for you, and maybe some time away will help you figure out what really matters in life." I ignored the offered handshake and slammed my trunk closed with enough force to rattle the entire car, but Derek just smiled and stepped back with the patience of someone who had already won every battle that mattered. The worst revelation came when I tried to access my bank account later that morning and discovered my parents had removed me from their family's cell phone plan, canceled my health insurance policy, and somehow convinced Uncle Steve to reverse my final paycheck due to the allegation of theft. Even more devastating, Dad had contacted his union friends throughout Central Ohio, spreading word that I was suspected of stealing from family and should not be trusted with construction or architecture work. By noon, I was completely cut off from every support system I had ever known, with $800 in cash and no prospects for employment in the only industry where I had marketable skills. The isolation felt like drowning in slow motion, each breath becoming more difficult as the reality of my situation settled over me like suffocating weight. The weekly motel on Cleveland Avenue charged $120 for 7 nights in a room that reeked of cigarette smoke and industrial disinfectant, but it offered the only accommodation I could afford while searching for work. The other residents were day laborers, recovering addicts, and people running from various kinds of trouble, their faces carrying the hollow look of those who had fallen through society's cracks. Job applications yielded nothing but polite rejections and uncomfortable silences when potential employers called Dad's union office for references. The blacklisting was thorough and effective, extending beyond construction into retail and food service, as Derek's influence seemed to reach into every corner of Columbus's interconnected business community. 3 weeks into my exile, when the motel manager informed me that my credit card had been declined and I needed to pay cash or find somewhere else to sleep, I realized I had crossed the line from temporary displacement into actual homelessness. My Honda became my bedroom, parked in different locations each night to avoid attracting attention from police or security guards. The physical discomfort of sleeping in a cramped car was nothing compared to the psychological torture of complete social isolation. Former friends crossed the street when they saw me approaching, unwilling to associate with someone under suspicion of family theft. Co-workers from Uncle Steve's firm acted like I had never existed, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever I appeared at job sites seeking day labor work. Even the homeless shelter turned me away after running a background check that somehow included Derek's theft allegations, their policy prohibiting admission of anyone with pending criminal investigations. I was too suspicious for charity, but too broke for independence, trapped in a limbo that seemed designed to break whatever spirit I had left. The weight loss began as a practical necessity. When food became a luxury I could not consistently afford, but it continued as my appetite disappeared under the crushing burden of depression and despair. 40 pounds melted away over 6 months, transforming my appearance so dramatically that I barely recognized myself in reflective surfaces. Madison's wedding invitations arrived at Grandpa Frank's address in late August, forwarded to my current location at a gas station where I'd been sleeping in my car behind the dumpster. The elegant cardstock and calligraphy seemed to mock my circumstances, announcing the celebration that had cost me everything I valued, while Derek claimed the prize he had maneuvered to obtain. Grandpa Frank tried to visit me once, sneaking away from the house when the family was at work, but the sight of my deteriorated condition triggered another chest episode that required an ambulance ride to the hospital. I could not bear being responsible for his declining health. So I stopped returning his calls and moved further away from the neighborhood where someone might recognize me and report back to my former family. The absolute bottom came in late September when my car finally gave up its engine seizing on a busy highway during rush hour traffic. The towing fee exceeded my available cash, and impound charges would have consumed my remaining resources for weeks, so I walked away from the only shelter I had left and officially joined the ranks of Columbus's street population. A social worker at the downtown Mission explained that family estrangement was increasingly common among their clients, often triggered by false accusations, mental health crises, or manipulation by predatory romantic partners who sought to isolate victims from support systems. Her clinical analysis of my situation provided some comfort confirmation that I was not uniquely cursed or personally responsible for the destruction of my relationships. But understanding the pattern did not restore my family or rebuild my life. And as autumn temperatures dropped toward winter, I began to wonder if survival was worth the effort it required. The complete absence of hope felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making each breath an act of deliberation rather than instinct. The only thing that kept me moving forward was a stubborn refusal to let Derek win completely. Somewhere in the fog of despair, a small flame of anger burned steadily, fueled by the certainty that his victory was built on lies and manipulation. If I gave up now, Madison would never learn the truth about the man she had married, and my parents would live forever with the false belief that their son was a thief. That anger became my anchor, the single point of solid ground in an ocean of uncertainty and loss. Derek had destroyed my life, but he had not destroyed my knowledge of who I really was. And as long as that knowledge survived, the possibility of redemption remained alive. 6 months after losing everything, I finally found steady work at Murphy's Gas and a 24-hour convenience store on the outskirts of Columbus, where the night shift manager did not ask too many questions about employment history or living arrangements. The job paid $8.50 per hour, barely enough to afford a shared room in a rundown house with two other guys who were rebuilding their lives after various disasters. Marcus played guitar in a band that never quite made it past dive bar gigs, his dreams of musical stardom slowly fading as he approached 30, with nothing to show for years of dedication except calloused fingers and an impressive collection of rejection letters. Jamal was 22 and working toward an associate degree in computer science at the community college, his intelligence obvious despite the circumstances that had landed him in our shared accommodation. The house on Parsons Avenue had seen better decades, its walls thin enough that every conversation became communal property, and its plumbing unreliable enough that hot showers required careful timing and negotiation. But it offered privacy, safety, and the basic dignity of an address where I could receive mail and sleep without fear of police harassment. My shift at Murphy's ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. serving coffee to insomniacs selling cigarettes to factory workers and cleaning up the messes left by customers who treated convenience stores like their personal dumping grounds. The work was mind-numbing, but it provided structure to days that had become formless stretches of survival and recovery. More importantly, the job offered something I had not realized: I was desperate for human interaction with people who knew nothing about my history and had no reason to judge me based on accusations and rumors. Regular customers began recognizing me, sharing small talk about weather and sports that felt like precious gifts after months of complete social isolation. During slow periods between 2 and 5 a.m., I studied accounting textbooks, borrowed from the community college library, determined to develop skills that would eventually lead to better employment. Professor Helen Martinez taught night classes for working adults. Her patient explanations and encouraging feedback gradually rebuilding my confidence in my ability to learn and grow. The transformation was slow and often painful, like physical therapy after a devastating injury. Some days the weight of what I had lost felt unbearable, threatening to drag me back into the despair that had nearly destroyed me entirely. But other days brought small victories, a positive comment from my supervisor, a successful exam grade, or simply the satisfaction of completing another shift without breaking down. Jamal became an unexpected ally in my recovery, sharing his own story of family rejection after coming out as gay in a household where religious fundamentalism left no room for acceptance or understanding. His resilience and determination to succeed despite setbacks provided a model for how to rebuild identity and purpose after losing everything that had previously defined existence. Together, we developed routines that supported our mutual goal study sessions at the kitchen table after his classes, and before my shifts, shared meals of cheap but nutritious food that stretched our limited budgets and honest conversations about the future we were working to create rather than the past we had survived. The turning point came on a bitter cold night in February when Derek walked into Murphy's around 3 a.m., clearly coming from some kind of social event based on his expensive suit and the lingering scent of alcohol and cologne. He did not recognize me initially, my 40-pound weight loss, and months of stress having aged me beyond easy identification. I watched him browse the snack aisle while talking loudly on his cell phone, his voice carrying the arrogant confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. The conversation was clearly business-related, something about pharmaceutical samples and insurance billing that made my limited understanding of his work seem even more suspicious. Then Derek moved closer to the register while continuing his phone call, and I heard words that made my blood freeze in my veins. He was bragging about an insurance scam, describing how he had manipulated previous girlfriends' families to gain access to valuable items that could be resold through untraceable networks. The engagement ring theft, he boasted, had worked perfectly to eliminate the protective brother who had threatened to expose his background. My hands shook as I pretended to organize cigarette displays behind the counter, but I managed to activate the recording function on my phone. While Derek continued his incriminating conversation just 15 feet away, he described Madison as his current mark, praising her family's middle-class stability and the inheritance potential that made her worth the effort of an extended con. The call lasted nearly 10 minutes, during which Derek revealed details about insurance fraud, identity theft, and manipulation tactics that painted a picture of criminal activity spanning multiple states and numerous victims. When he finally approached the counter to purchase energy drinks and breath mints, I kept my head down and processed his transaction without making eye contact, terrified that recognition would cost me this unexpected gift of evidence. Only after his BMW disappeared into the night did I allow myself to listen to the recording confirming that my phone had captured every damning word of Derek's confession. The revelation was both vindicating and horrifying. I had been right about his suspicious background, but Madison and my family had become victims of a predator far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. For the first time since the accusations began, I felt something resembling hope stirring in my chest. Derek's arrogance had finally provided the weapon I needed to expose his true nature, but I realized that simply turning the recording over to police would not achieve the deeper goal of restoring my family relationships. I wanted more than Derek's arrest. I wanted my family to understand the full scope of their betrayal and the consequences of choosing manipulation over truth. The recording was just the beginning of a longer investigation that would require patience, planning, and resources I was only beginning to accumulate. Professor Martinez noticed the change in my demeanor during the next class session, commenting that I seemed more focused and determined than she had seen before. When I explained that I had discovered important information about a personal situation, she offered guidance about research techniques and documentation methods that could strengthen whatever case I was building. Jamal's computer skills proved invaluable when I shared the general outline of my situation, without revealing specific details that might compromise the investigation. He taught me about online public records, social media research, and digital security measures that would protect my efforts from detection while gathering additional evidence. The plan that emerged over the following weeks was ambitious, but methodical document Derek's criminal background through official records, gather evidence of his pattern of targeting vulnerable women and families, and prepare a comprehensive case that would expose not only his crimes but also the methods he used to manipulate victims and evade prosecution. But first I needed to become someone worthy of being believed, someone whose word carried weight against Derek's polished charm and apparent success. That meant continuing my education, rebuilding my financial stability, and demonstrating the integrity that had been called into question by his accusations. The work was exhausting and often discouraging, but it provided purpose that had been missing from my life since the initial accusation. Every small step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of the dignity Derek had stolen, and every new piece of evidence brought me closer to the moment when truth would finally overcome lies. As spring arrived and the first anniversary of my exile approached, I realized I was no longer the same person who had been driven from his family home in shame and confusion. The experience had stripped away illusions about unconditional love and family loyalty, but it had also revealed reserves of strength and determination I had never known existed. Derek had intended to destroy me completely, but his cruelty had instead forged something harder and more focused than the naive young man who had once trusted that good intentions and family bonds would protect him from predators. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and this time, the prey had learned to fight back. Armed with Derek's recorded confession and Professor Martinez's research guidance, I began a methodical investigation that would have made Detective Russell Clark proud if he had been working for truth instead of manufactured evidence. The community college library became my second home, its computer terminals providing free access to public records databases and court filing systems that revealed the scope of Derek's criminal activities. The first breakthrough came when Jamal helped me cross-reference Derek Hamilton with variations of his name and previous addresses mentioned in his phone conversation. We discovered that Derek Coleman, Derek Halstead, and Derek Hartwell were all aliases used by the same person over the past 5 years, each identity abandoned when legal troubles or suspicious victims made continued operation impossible. Court records from Kentucky revealed a pattern of fraud charges that had been dismissed on technicalities or resolved through plea agreements that involved restitution payments and relocated residency. Derek specialized in targeting women from stable middle-class families using pharmaceutical sales credentials that were either fabricated or obtained through identity theft from legitimate professionals. Social media provided even more damning evidence once we learned to search for his alternate identities and cross-reference them with previous romantic relationships. Instagram and Facebook profiles showed Derek with at least 3 other women over the past 4 years, each relationship featuring expensive gifts, elaborate proposals, and eventual disappearances that coincided with reports of missing jewelry or unexplained financial irregularities. The most heartbreaking discovery was a Facebook post from a woman named Jennifer Walsh in Louisville describing her family's devastation after her fiancé vanished with her grandmother's antique engagement ring and several $1,000s borrowed for wedding expenses. Her description of Derek matched perfectly down to his BMW and pharmaceutical sales story, but the post was nearly 2 years old and her profile indicated she had since moved to California. Another victim, Sarah Chen from Lexington, had filed a police report alleging that her ex-boyfriend had stolen her mother's pearl necklace during a family gathering where he claimed to be feeling sick and needed to rest alone in the master bedroom. The report included a photograph that was unmistakably Derek, though he was using the name Derek Hartwell at that time. Each new piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of Derek's methodology to identify vulnerable targets through work or social connections, establish romantic relationships with women who had access to family wealth, gain trust through expensive gifts purchased with previous victims' stolen property, then manufacture crises that eliminated protective family members who threatened to expose his background. My case was not unique. It was simply the latest iteration of a well-practiced con that Derek had perfected through years of experience and multiple victims. The pattern was so consistent that I began to understand how he had known exactly which psychological pressure points to manipulate in my family, how he had anticipated my parents' reactions, and why he had been so confident that his accusations would succeed. The investigation revealed that Derek's pharmaceutical sales credentials were stolen from a legitimate representative named Derek Henderson, who had reported the identity theft to authorities 18 months earlier. The real Derek Henderson lived in Pennsylvania and had never been to Ohio, but his professional credentials and sales territory information provided perfect cover for Derek Coleman's activities in our region. Jamal's computer skills uncovered financial irregularities that suggested money laundering through multiple bank accounts and cryptocurrency exchanges, evidence that Derek's criminal enterprise extended far beyond simple theft into organized fraud that crossed state lines and involved federal crimes. The scope of his operation was staggering, with potential victims numbering in the dozens and financial damages reaching into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the most devastating discovery came when I found Derek's real criminal history under his original name. Derek Coleman had spent 3 years in federal prison for securities fraud before beginning his current career as a romance scammer. His release from custody coinciding exactly with the timeline of his first known victim relationship in Kentucky. The pattern revealed that Madison was not just his latest target, she was likely to be his final victim before he disappeared completely. Social media posts showed their wedding date approaching rapidly, and Derek had convinced my parents to liquidate Grandpa Frank's valuable coin collection to help pay for an elaborate ceremony that would provide perfect cover for his eventual vanishing act. Professor Martinez helped me understand the legal implications of our findings, explaining how federal jurisdiction applied when crimes crossed state boundaries and involved mail fraud or wire fraud components. She introduced me to Detective Sarah Walsh with the Columbus Police Department's White Collar Crime Unit, a specialist in financial fraud cases who took immediate interest in our documented evidence. Detective Walsh confirmed that Derek matched the description of a suspect wanted in connection with similar crimes in 3 other states, and that our evidence could provide the foundation for federal charges that would carry serious prison time. But she also explained that building a prosecutable case would require patience and careful coordination to avoid alerting Derek before authorities were ready to arrest him. The timing was critical because Derek and Madison's wedding was scheduled for the following month, after which Derek would likely disappear with whatever assets he could liquidate from their combined resources. We needed to move quickly but carefully, gathering enough evidence to ensure conviction while protecting additional potential victims from harm. Working with Detective Walsh, we developed a plan to document Derek's activities over the next several weeks, building an airtight case that would satisfy federal prosecutors, while minimizing the risk that he would detect surveillance and flee before arrest. The investigation required maintaining my current living situation and employment to avoid drawing attention, but it also meant that clearing my name was finally within reach. The most difficult part of the plan was accepting that Madison and my parents would need to learn the truth through Derek's arrest rather than through my direct intervention. Detective Walsh explained that premature disclosure could compromise the investigation and allow Derek to destroy evidence or harm additional victims, so I would need to trust the legal system to vindicate me rather than seeking immediate personal satisfaction. But late at night in our shared house on Parsons Avenue, listening to Marcus practice guitar and Jamal type code for his programming assignments, I felt something I had not experienced in nearly 2 years. Confidence that truth would eventually triumph over lies. Derek's arrogance had provided the evidence needed to expose him, and his pattern of criminal behavior ensured that justice would be swift and comprehensive once authorities moved against him. The investigation had transformed me from victim to advocate, giving me purpose and direction that extended beyond personal vindication. Each new piece of evidence represented another family protected from Derek's manipulation, another vulnerable person who would not suffer the destruction I had experienced. As Detective Walsh prepared to present our findings to federal prosecutors, I realized that rebuilding my life had become secondary to ensuring that Derek faced consequences for his crimes against multiple families. The personal satisfaction of clearing my name would be meaningless if other innocent people continued to suffer, while Derek remained free to continue his predatory activities. The hunt was almost over, and this time the predator would be the one caught in a trap he could not manipulate or escape. Justice was finally within reach, not just for me, but for all of Derek's victims who had been denied the truth for far too long. 2 years and 3 months after Derek's false accusation destroyed my life, my phone rang at 6:30 in the morning while I was getting ready for my shift at Murphy's Gas and Go. Dad's voice was barely recognizable through his sobs, broken and desperate in a way I had never heard before, even during Grandma Helen's final illness or Grandpa Frank's recent health scares. They found it. He gasped between tears, his words tumbling out in a rush of anguish and disbelief. Madison's ring, we found it in the garbage disposal during the kitchen renovation. It was there the whole time, Elton. Crushed up and mangled, but still recognizable. Derek must have put it there himself. The call I had been anticipating for months still hit me like a physical blow, not because of surprise, but because of the sheer enormity of vindication finally arriving. Through Detective Walsh, I had known this moment was coming. Federal agents were preparing to arrest Derek that very morning, based on evidence we had gathered over the past 6 weeks of careful investigation. "Mom," he continued, his voice cracking completely, "wants to know if you can ever forgive us. We know we failed you, son. We know we chose to believe lies over our own flesh and blood, and we cannot live with what we did to you." Before I could respond to Dad's tearful confession, I heard sirens approaching the Maple Street neighborhood where I had once felt safe and loved. Detective Walsh had coordinated Derek's arrest to coincide with the ring's discovery, ensuring that my family would understand the full scope of his deception before he could manufacture new lies to explain the evidence. "I have to go, Dad," I said quietly, my voice steady, despite the emotional earthquake shaking my foundations. "But yes, I will come home. There are things you need to know about Derek, things that will help you understand how this happened." The drive to my childhood neighborhood took 20 minutes, but it felt like traveling through time, rather than distance, each familiar landmark, triggering memories of the person I used to be, before Derek's manipulation taught me harsh lessons about trust and family loyalty. My Honda Civic purchased used after saving every penny from my convenience store wages looked shabby beside the expensive cars filling the driveway, but I no longer cared about appearances or other people's judgments. Detective Walsh met me at the curb. Her professional demeanor softened by what looked like personal satisfaction at finally closing a case that had frustrated multiple law enforcement agencies for years. Derek was already in custody. She explained, arrested at his downtown office on federal charges that would likely result in 15 to 20 years in prison given his extensive criminal history. The arrest had been swift and decisive, with federal agents seizing computers, financial records, and stolen property that linked Derek to victims across 4 states. His pharmaceutical sales credentials were confirmed as stolen, his multiple identities documented, and his pattern of targeting vulnerable families exposed through evidence that would make conviction inevitable. But Detective Walsh warned me that the emotional aftermath would be complicated and painful for everyone involved. Madison was in shock, unable to process that her fiancé and life partner was actually a career criminal who had manipulated her entire family as part of an elaborate con. My parents were devastated by guilt and shame, recognizing that their favoritism and poor judgment had nearly destroyed their son while enabling a predator to operate freely. The scene inside my childhood home was unlike anything I could have prepared for, even after months of anticipating this moment. Mom sat at the kitchen table, clutching the crushed remains of Madison's engagement ring, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the evidence of Derek's deception. The ring was barely recognizable, its expensive stones scattered, and its setting twisted beyond repair by garbage disposal blades that had hidden the truth for more than 2 years. Madison herself was almost catatonic with shock. Her usual confidence and animation replaced by the hollow expression of someone whose entire reality had collapsed in a single morning. She looked at me with eyes full of pain and regret, but seemed unable to form words that could bridge the gulf her accusations had created between us. Dad stood when I entered, his face gray with exhaustion and shame. Without speaking, he pulled me into a hug that felt desperate and grateful and heartbroken all at once, his body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from the deepest parts of his soul. "I am so sorry," he whispered against my shoulder, his voice muffled but clear. "We failed you in every possible way. We let that monster turn us against our own son, and we cannot forgive ourselves for what we did." Detective Walsh provided additional context, that helped explain the full scope of Derek's crimes, revealing details that even our investigation had not uncovered. He had targeted Madison specifically after researching our family's financial situation and identifying Grandpa Frank's coin collection as a valuable asset worth manipulating the family to access. The engagement ring theft had been carefully planned to eliminate me as a threat to his operation, Derek having correctly identified me as the family member most likely to investigate his background and expose his lies. By framing me for theft and turning my own family against me, he had removed the primary obstacle to his plan while simultaneously isolating Madison from anyone who might protect her from his manipulation. Even more chilling was the discovery that Derek had planned to disappear immediately after the wedding ceremony, taking not only the liquidated proceeds from Grandpa Frank's coin collection, but also Madison's savings account and several valuable family heirlooms that he had convinced my parents to use as wedding decorations. The elaborate ceremony they had planned would have been his final performance before vanishing completely, leaving Madison and my family financially and emotionally destroyed. Professor Martinez arrived later that afternoon, having been invited by Detective Walsh to help explain the research techniques we had used to expose Derek's criminal network. Her presence provided credible validation for the investigation that had restored my reputation, demonstrating that my vindication resulted from careful detective work rather than luck or coincidence. But the most meaningful moment came when Grandpa Frank emerged from his bedroom, moving slowly but determinedly toward the family gathering that was reshaping our relationships. His stroke had affected his mobility, but not his mental acuity, and his eyes brightened with relief when he saw me standing in his kitchen again. "I knew you were innocent," he said simply, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "That boy never sat right with me, always too smooth and too eager to please. Real men do not need to work so hard to convince people they are honest." The conversation that followed lasted deep into the evening, covering not only Derek's crimes, but also the family dynamics that had made his manipulation possible. Madison had to confront her role in enabling Derek's abuse, acknowledging that her competitive relationship with me had made her vulnerable to someone who exploited sibling rivalry for criminal purposes. My parents faced even harder truths about their favoritism and poor judgment, recognizing that their willingness to believe the worst about me had been rooted in assumptions and prejudices they had never examined. The pain of that recognition was visible on their faces, but it also seemed to offer the possibility of genuine growth and change. Derek's sentencing hearing 3 months later provided final closure to a nightmare that had consumed more than 2 years of our lives. Federal prosecutors presented evidence of fraud schemes affecting 17 families across 4 states, with financial damages exceeding $400,000 and emotional trauma that would take years to heal. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced Derek Coleman to 18 years in federal prison, followed by supervised probation that would restrict his access to social media and dating websites for the remainder of his natural life. The sentence was severe but appropriate given the scope of his crimes and the likelihood that he would continue targeting vulnerable families if given any opportunity to do so. Madison attended every day of the trial, forcing herself to confront the full extent of Derek's deception and her own role in enabling his crimes against our family. The experience was brutal but necessary, helping her understand how manipulation worked and why she had been vulnerable to someone who exploited her insecurities and ambitions. The financial restitution Derek was ordered to pay would never fully compensate his victims, but the recovered property and seized assets provided some relief for families who had suffered losses. More importantly, his conviction and lengthy sentence ensured that no other families would endure the destruction we had experienced. My parents' efforts to make amends extended far beyond apologies and emotional reconciliation. They insisted on funding my completion of college coursework, helping me establish an independent architecture practice, and providing financial support that recognized their role in derailing my career and personal development. But the most valuable gift was their commitment to rebuilding our family relationships on healthier foundations with honest communication, replacing the favoritism and assumptions that had made Derek's manipulation possible. Family therapy sessions were difficult and sometimes painful, but they provided tools for addressing conflicts without resorting to accusations or emotional manipulation. Madison's recovery was slower and more complicated, requiring individual therapy to address the trauma of realizing that someone she loved had viewed her only as a target for exploitation. But she eventually found the strength to apologize sincerely and to demonstrate through actions that she understood the magnitude of her betrayal. Today, 3 years after Derek's arrest, our family relationships are stronger than they were before his arrival, though they are built on different foundations than the naive trust we once took for granted. We have learned to communicate more directly, to question assumptions, and to protect each other from manipulation while respecting individual autonomy and judgment. My architecture practice specializes in affordable housing and community development projects work that provides both financial stability and personal satisfaction through helping families build better lives. The experience of losing everything taught me to value relationships and integrity over material success lessons that guide every decision I make in business and personal matters. Grandpa Frank lived to see Derek's conviction and my family's reconciliation passing peacefully in his sleep 6 months after the trial ended. His final words to me were about the importance of forgiveness and the strength required to rebuild trust after betrayal, wisdom that continues to guide my understanding of human nature and family loyalty. The garbage disposal that had hidden Madison's ring for more than 2 years was replaced during the kitchen renovation. But Mom kept a piece of the old unit as a reminder of how easily truth can be concealed and how important it is to investigate thoroughly before accepting accusations that seem too convenient to believe. Derek's case became a training example for law enforcement agencies dealing with romance fraud and family manipulation schemes, helping other investigators recognize patterns and protect vulnerable victims from predators who exploit trust and love for criminal purposes. Detective Walsh received commendations for her work on the investigation recognition that felt like validation for everyone who had contributed to exposing Derek's crimes. Sometimes I think about how differently things might have ended if Derek had been more careful, or if I had not happened to be working at Murphy's Gas and Go when his arrogance led him to incriminate himself over the phone. But I believe truth has a way of surfacing eventually, especially when predators grow too confident in their ability to manipulate and control their victims. The experience taught me that family love is not always unconditional, but it can be rebuilt and strengthened when people are willing to acknowledge their mistakes and commit to doing better. It also showed me that individual integrity and determination can overcome even the most sophisticated manipulation, though the cost of that victory may be higher than anyone should have to pay. Most importantly, I learned that justice is not always swift, but it can be thorough and meaningful when people refuse to give up fighting for truth. Derek thought he had destroyed me completely, but his cruelty instead created someone stronger and more focused than the naive young man he had originally targeted. Today, when I look at my family gathered around the same dining room table where Derek once charmed his way into our lives, I feel grateful for the hard lessons that taught us to value honesty over appearances and substance over charm. The scars remain, but they serve as reminders of our strength and resilience rather than our failures and pain. Have you ever had your family turn against you over false accusations? How did you find the strength to keep fighting when everyone you trusted abandoned you? Share your story in the comments below. And please like this video if it resonated with your own experiences of betrayal and redemption. Thank you for listening to this painful but ultimately hopeful journey through deception, family conflict, and the long road back to trust and love. Remember that truth has power even when it seems buried beyond recovery, and that the courage to stand by your principles can eventually lead to justice and healing. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming life's greatest challenges and share this video with anyone who might need hope that broken relationships can be repaired when people are willing to do the difficult work of acknowledging their mistakes and rebuilding trust. Sometimes the darkest moments in our lives become the foundation for our greatest strength and wisdom.